Welcome to the Museum of North Idaho. It doesn't look like much of a museum now, but that's where you can help. This fundraiser is 100% for the renovations to the historic J.C. White House, and we are so close to making our goal to receive a certificate of occupancy by the end of the year. So please donate on Facebook, on our website at www.museumni.org, or we can take checks to our P.O. Box. You can, until Halloween, bring it into the museum. We would love to see you at 115 Northwest Boulevard. And without any further ado, the Museum of North Idaho is proud to present Two Nickels Make a Dime, a 3-act play written and narrated by George Currier.
My name is George Currier, and I thank you for this opportunity to read for you this play that I wrote. It's titled Two Nickels Make a Dime, Logging Up the Marble. Act 1, Scene 1. At curtain rise, at stage right, to and including the acting stage, is a creek scene with men standing in it bathing. A creek side is also seen with men standing ashore around large containers of boiling water. They're stirring articles of clothing and blankets. At stage left, an entry door to the bunkhouse. On the apron is a Paul Bunyan-esque narrator. He's sitting upon a log stump. He speaks. You know, you can't talk St. Mary's without talking about logging. Now, back in the early 1900s, there were so many loggers walking the streets and wharfs that St. Mary's was called the biggest logging camp in all northern Idaho. And you can't talk about St. Mary's unless you also talk about loggers. Now, old-time loggers like John Innes, he was born in Ireland. He was orphaned, neglected, and abandoned at 6. And then he was scooped up, put into a reformatory for begging. He ended up in St. Mary's in 1914. Wash Applegate, he was born in Indiana in 1898. He came in by freight train in 1913 when he was 15 years old. He loved logging more than anything. Bill Robinson, he still got kin living here, I think. And he helped fight that 1910 fire at Bear Creek. He homesteaded and he logged up P.D. Creek. As you might know, they weren't all Bible-reading Swiss, not by a long shot. There were trappers and teamsters and unemployed farmers, drifters, 15-year-old kids, Forest Service workers, homesteaders, lots of homesteaders, even some successful lumbermen from the east like Weyerhaeuser and Herrick, to name a couple. Their restless ghosts are still walking our streets. Now, you just can't talk St. Mary's logging now without talking about Marble Creek. Now, Marble Creek wasn't easy logging. There was steep hillsides and fast-moving streams with rocky beds that smashed up logs so bad that they had to cut them long because they had to trim off the splits and the broomed ends, even embedded rocks. It was logging where the movement of logs was a constant challenge and danger to man and beast alike. Men were being hurt or killed. Even a horse used for skidding seldom lasted 10 years before being crippled or otherwise deemed useless. The Marble Creek loggers' motto, be quick or be dead, applied to them poor animals, too. In the camps, it was hard, even satisfying your basic needs, ranging from your morning trot to the privy to just keeping clean. There was no shower or laundry facilities. They weren't provided at all. So the loggers had to use their one day off, Sunday, to get to the creekside, set up pots over open fires, and boil off their clothes and blankets while bathing in that creek. This was a ritual that was never missed, as it was the main way that they had to get the bed bugs and the other vermin from their bodies and clothing. Tough times for sure. But the Wobblies, the industrial workers of the world, were trying to change that over all of America. They were challenging the mining companies, the big steel company bosses, even the lumber baron partnership of Weyerhaeuser and Rutledge, and Milwaukee Timbers Company Fred Herrick. They were striving for an 8-hour day at $5 a day, 40-hour week, and they wanted improved living conditions, especially shower and laundry provisions, and they wanted better food for the camps. Now these loggers and the Wobblies is what this story is about. Light fades from the narrator. Light returns to the acting stage. The sounds of a rushing creek is dominant as the lights come up and reveal numerous men, nearly stripped, standing in a small creek washing their bodies. Others, partially clothed and standing around large cut-off drums of boiling water. They're stirring articles of clothing in the drums. The sounds of a rushing creek provide the background noise to the conversations. Haas fell in his 30s, tall, bearded, partially stripped and chattering cold. He's in the water soaping and washing his body. Nick, an older feller, 50, 55 years old, he's stripped of clothing like the others, except he's wearing a dark seaman stocking cap. He's also soaping and washing his body. Nick and his seaman's cap are considered inseparable. He even wears it to bed. Then there's Jake, bearded, about the same age as Haas. He's just emerging from the creek. He's dripping wet. Frenchy Lee and others also emerge from the water. Jake speaks. Sheesh! Whew! That water is cold as ice. The sounds of the rushing creek increase. Haas, still rinsing off his body, he tilts his head as if he couldn't hear or understand what was said. He said, "What'd you say?" And Jake puts his hands to his mouth as if it was a megaphone, and he says, "I said the water is cold as ice. Now aim your butt into that wind and let it blow the crud out of your ears." Then repeating, he says, "The water's cold, ain't you noticed?" Haas points his finger directly at Jake and jokingly says, "Cold? You're getting soft, Jake. You're standing dry all day under a tin roof, feeding firewood into that donkey and griping, while the rest of us are out there working hard." Then the comment really meant for the others as well as for Jake. He continues, "Yep, he's gone soft." Men are drying themselves. They dress and approach the drums of boiling water. They throw in articles of clothing. They each pick up a stick and commence stirring the articles of clothing around in the water. Jake motions to Haas, who's just now emerging from the creek, to join him over there at the laundry drum. He says, "Over here, Haas." Then he says in a mock angry tone, "Soft, am I? Well, let's just grab a couple of broad axes and let's score a shoot log. You start one and I'll start t'other, and I'll be chopping at your heels before you make a dozen swings. Come on, I'll show you who's soft." Haas, chuckling, says, "I'd sure like to take your challenge, but as soon as I get done here, I'm heading for the cookhouse for a Sunday dinner. I don't want to be sitting down there worrying about you out here by yourself trying to catch up." He picks a spot near the other busy and shivering men, standing between the drums and stirring their clothes. He starts tending to his laundry. Frenchy Lee was standing next to Jake. He's also stirring his clothing. Moves a piece, then returns it to the water, removes another piece, puts it back in the water. Then he says, "You know, it sure takes more than hot water to kill these damn lice. Them lice are floating on the bedbug's back like they're out for a day's boating." Jake, chuckling, he removes various pieces of clothing and a couple of blankets, which he holds up for all to see. And turning towards Nick, Jake points to the stocking cap and says, You better throw your damn hat in there. Critters are hanging out there waiting for you to dry off. Then they head south, homestead on your butt again. Nick waves him off and says, "Oh, to hell with you." Haas says, "This is what I've been harping about. Herrick should be providing us clean blankets every week without the damn bugs." And holding one of his blankets up, he continues, "What's he do about it? He sells us coal oil to sprinkle on 'em. And those damn hay-filled gunny bags that some crazy man called a mattress, they're crawling with bugs. Them bugs are getting as tough as a moonshiner drinking his own whiskey." Jake pinches his lips together, and then giving him an exaggerated smile, he says, "Oh, Hoss, are you going to shovel some of that wobbly BS on me? You trying to sign me up again?" Hoss says, "Now, come on, look around, Jake. We're working 12 hours every day but Sunday. A day hardly goes by that someone doesn't get hurt bad. And these bed bugs and lice are just another aggravation. Do you like that?" And not waiting for a response, Hoss continues, "The work pace needs slowing down some. And wanting a laundry and hot showers ain't asking much. Showers that we can use during the week and not having to depend on this cold-ass crick every Sunday." Jake stood silent for a moment, then as if pondering what was said, and then he responds, "Oh, come on, I don't want to pull your whistle, but we're getting fed. We got a roof over our heads, and we're getting regular pay." Hoss says, "Yeah, we're working for 4 lousy shin plasters a day, and we're paying them back 6 bits of that for that roof and that chow. A crowded bunkhouse with dirt floors. A roof is all we got." Jake responds. He says, "Dirt floor or not, it's still better than a rag tent. As long as you work, you get paid enough to at least pay your board. When I was living in boxcars, I dreamt of a life like this." Hoss, with pinched face and sarcastic tone, says, "Jake, you weren't born in that damn boxcar. You're figuring wrong if you think our bunkhouse is heaven. Triple-deck bunks, bed bugs, and lice so bad most nights we'd rather sleep out in the bushes, and we usually do." Jake shakes his head from side to side. "Before Herrick hired me, I was riding the rails, all the way from Kansas, looking for work. I worried about getting a knife stuck in my ribs and knowing for sure that I'd be dying, and I'd be dying alone. And this sure beats that." Hoss, with an obvious false air of concern, says, "Sad, sad story, Jake. I had sense enough to sign up with the Wobblies, especially on the rails." Jake says, Signing up? Signing up for what?" Then answer his question, "For nothing, that's what." Hoss says, "Well, hell, they taught me the rules of the road. They taught me the hobo signs. They looked after us, then and now." Jake says, "You mean signs like where to get a handout?" And chuckling, he continues, "I wanted work, not a damn handout." Hoss says, "No, I learned where I could wash and rest up without getting robbed. Damn it, Jake, the Wobblies were the ones that kept them camps safe. Now, you probably didn't even know about them safe camps, did you? Huh? Did you?" Frenchy Lee was standing nearby, and then while speaking in the air, he draws an imaginary X with his finger, adding 2 quick pokes. The Wobblies marked them safe camps by chalking an X on with cat eyes. They drawed it on a tree or a pole nearby the camp. They would sure enough be there to police it. Hoss says, "Jake, you'll damn sure die alone if you don't pitch in with us. Now who in the hell else do you have? We need each other." Hoss starts removing clothing from the drums, hot water, and wringing them out. Jake says, "You just can't, you just got to get off my back. Now, I ain't joining nothing. You always wanted me to join, and I ain't joining. I ran across wobblies on the rails, and they all carried guns. They're all looking for trouble. They're asking for too much, so just get off my back. And shaking his head from side to side, he continues, there's just too much agitation, so just let sleeping dogs lie. Let things play out. Hell, now the government's even locking them up every chance they get. And the hoss raises his eyebrows and says, it'll take a lot of locking up. We got 50 loggers this camp alone. Most of them carry an IWW card. You're one of the few that don't. Jake, now with sarcasm, says, well, I don't have a card. But we're all wanting a good life, card or not. But it takes time. And we got a pretty good cookhouse now. Didn't have that before. Then sneeringly he says, you wobblies think that you did that? Frenchy Lee was walking away from the others a short distance, but he returns to the place of conversation at that comment, and then he forcefully says, matter of fact, you're damn right. Before Sourdough and Thelma took over the cookhouse, we couldn't eat without getting the squirts and a bellyache. The only reason Herrick changed it to the better was because of the wobblies rocking the boat, threatening a strike. Hoss slips on his boots. While slipping one on, he puts one on, then he puts on the other, and he leaves them untied, and then he starts moving away with the others from the fires. I was in a black gang, cutting for Herrick up Big Creek after the 1910 fires. We were trying to beat the pine bugs, ruining that wood. We were handling burnt trees that was covered with charcoal. Frenchy Lee says, that was a rag outfit, wasn't it? Hoss said, yeah, we was living in tents. He would even set up a bathhouse for us. Now, we sure weren't his first order interest then, and we ain't now. Nick joins the pack as they start moving away, his laundered clothing now stowed in a bag over his shoulder. He shakes his head, claps his hands together, fingers tightly interlaced. You know, the big boys, Weyerhaeuser and Rutledge, they were tied together, tight, just like this. He shakes his tightly clasped hands in front of his chest. I figure Herrick's living hand to mouth. Rutledge's camps has got him hemmed in. They disrespect him, call him a peckerwood logger. He can't afford to give us nothing. Frenchy Lee said, what the hell are you talking about, Nick? What you mean, hemmed in? Then Nick replied, he said, hell, you know, he tried moving his Loki from Big Creek to the Marble. He even had 2 tunnels dug. Now, we knew that he was hoping to handle the big stuff, especially off of Rutledge's, but they blocked him from laying rails and going past their camp. So we're stuck with floating them out on the Joe, and that's hemming, buddy. And shaking his head in a knowing way. They weren't about to let him control how the logs get out of the Marble down to the Joe. Frenchy Lee said, you know, tit for tat. Rutledge wanted a flume from Bustles past us to the St. Joe, but Herrick stopped them from completing the same place that he got stopped by them. Then chuckling, he adds, most times they're having to peavy down that dry flume of theirs. Hoss shakes his head. Herrick ain't on his way to the poorhouse, Nick. I hear he made millions around the Great Lakes before coming here. Nah, Nick replied, you know, yeah, but Rutledge will bleed him to death. Herrick ain't got a chance. Hoss replied, you know, Rutledge runs the St. Joe boom outfit. About everybody's logs are down in there. But Herrick, now he takes his logs right out of the sorting gap, and he floats them himself to his mill. He doesn't need 'em. He ain't getting bled. And pausing, he continues, but we damn sure aren't getting much off his plate. Squawk, a young man about 19 years old, he had fallen in behind the slow-moving group earlier, and now he respectfully interjects. The blacksmith said that Rutledge and Weyerhaeuser had some wobblies jailed in St. Mary's. That the St. Mary's might be put under marital law by the Army. Jake agitated at Squawk's interjection. Jake retorts. He said, that's what I was saying, dickhead. Don't you listen? And it's not marital law, it's martial law. Now even the government's siding against them. The Wobblies are getting pushy. The soldiers will start shooting if the Lumbermen's Association tells them to. Now Frenchy Lee, in a patronizing way, replies, "Yeah, the Wobblies play rough, and I suppose that they'll be jailing more. Putting spikes in logs or cutting them short doesn't make friends in the mills." Then more forcefully he says, "But sometimes you gotta speak loud in order to be heard." Then French Lee starts singing in an exaggerated voice. Nick and Hoss clapped their hands in sync with Frenchy Lee's singing. "From the Marys up the Marble down to Clarky, the bosses feed us bunches of malarkey. They tell us 6 dimes make $1, and we'd better take it and not holler." Then he finishes, "We're tired of waiting." Jake directs his comments at Frenchy Lee. "Stuff your damn wobbly songs. Frank might overhear and liable to fire us all. You and Hoss have some strong union ideas that are spelling trouble. Just keep me out of it." Hoss says, "Well, the Wobblies ran the Scab Italians out of the woods, which finally moved our pay back up to our measly $4 a day. Now you're sure liking that kind of wobbly trouble, ain't you?" Jake, reflectively, I like that we got bunkhouses and not tents. I like that we got deacon benches to sit on and slip our boots on in the morning." Then shaking his head up and down in agreement to Hoss's comment, he continues, "And I like that $4 a day you're crowing about. And I damn sure like that we got pretty good cooks. The bosses aren't likely to part with much more than that." Approaching the bunkhouse, he addresses Hoss. "Anyways, my steam donkey's down for the rest of the week, and I'm talking to Frank about blowing into St. Mary's. I'll be asking him for a little time off. You and Nick and Frenchy Lee want to join me?" Frenchy Lee scrunches his face and shaking his head no, he states, "I was in last month. Spent my poke at the saloons and at Nellie's. I had a great time at Nell's new redhead Jill. I'll be seeing her again." And rubbing his hands together, "Ooh la la, but not this time. No money on the books." Jake punches Frenchy Lee on the arm and says, "You damn frog. I'll tell her hello for you all right, then I'll show her the way a real man goes about business." Hoss says, "Well, if the donkey's down and we're short horses to do the skidding, then we're down too. So I'm thinking that's about the most sensible thing you said all day, Jake. You count me in." Nick raises his fist above his head and he says, "I'm game." The men enter the bunkhouse. Fade out. Scene change. Next scene is in the cookhouse. There are benches, tables, men sitting there, pots of coffee, large serving dishes of potatoes and plates of meat, bread, everything on tin, all being placed on the tables by Thelma, an older woman. Now stage left is a functional door. The spotlight will focus and hover on the action scenes in sequence. The men pass the tin plates and chatter among themselves, pans banging and activities indicated by all that sound. Hoss, addressing Thelma, says, "Food's been downright decent since you and Sourdough took over the cookhouse." He drops his hand from his chin, points at Thelma, and smiling says, "Tasty as can be, thanks to you and Sourdough." But then spotting a serving platter full of rice and pork, he says, "But why all that rice and salt pork? Rice and the beans. The beans make my eyes water. They're powerful." Thelma answers in a kind of a false, hurt tone, "It ain't my beans. It's what you guys are doing with them. I just add the salt and soda, not the stink." Then jokingly, "Quit complaining or I'll start feeding them to your bunkhouse dog." She continues, "I'll admit, though, it's hard to cook too fancy with rice and salt pork. But we ain't been getting more beef and fresh pork off the Milwaukee's ice cars at the siding. When we first took over, finding anything in the storeroom to cook was sometimes like hunting in July for a piece of ice that you throwed out in December. But the truth is, seems like things might be improving. Maybe them wobblies are starting to get into Herrick's ear. Frenchy Lee says, maybe so, 'cause others are seeing the light. Bronson and Cox's camp got pay raises. 2 camps in Santa did too, so it could happen. At least Herrick isn't like most bosses that strut around thinking they're so damn important that God gave 'em 2 shadows. He does listen to us sometimes. Thelma nods in agreement. He leaves Sourdough and me pretty much alone. Told us to keep you all happy. Attention now directed to a lone man, a slight build. He's wearing a cap that completely covers his head. He's standing inside near the door, waiting until all the other men are seated. His rolled bedroll with the bindle stick is on the floor beside him. He approaches the tables and prepares to seat himself. Nods are exchanged between the newcomer and those already seated. He hesitates, however, not certain what his next move should be. Now, Frank violently bangs the door as he enters the cookhouse from stage left. He nods curtly and points to the newcomer and loudly questions, "You walk up last night?" And not waiting for an answer, he continues, "The walking boss will be here shortly. He's coming down from Camp 3. We could use a new whistle, punk." He sits at the head table, points to the newcomer, and comments to Thelma, "Camp rule, he'll get fed, whether we hire him or not, and he knows it. Probably slept out in the brush last night and walked up from the Joe early morning. Dish him up." The newcomer sits down. Thelma nods in agreement and commences to serve him. Jake yells over to Frank, "You hiring a new whistle, punk? What about Squawk?" Frank says, "Well, I'm figuring on sending him to the blacksmith. Start training him as a filer." Jake said, "Squawk's going to be filing?" Frank, "Yeah, he seems smart enough to learn. Anyway, you seem to always be on his butt, so you can just do without." Jake wrinkles his nose as if encountering a bad smell, and he shakes his head side to side and shrugs his shoulders. "It's no loss to me. As far as I'm concerned, he's just another reform school punk." Now Grotto enters the cookhouse just as violently as Frank did from the door stage left. He looks around the room and he spots Frank. Frank, looking away from Jake, then speaks to Grotto as he enters the cookhouse and says, "Hey, Bill, over here." Grotto heads to his table. Grotto roughly grabs a plate and demandingly motions to Thelma to dish it up, and then he gruffly asks, "You set up in that new location?" Frank says, "Well, I'm hoping to finish the donkey set up by next week." And Grotto says, "Well, I'm here to check it. You better have that spar guide and ready for that main line early in the week. It's been taking you too damn long." Jake answers defensively, but says, "Hell, I'll be skidding with it by week's end, if all goes well." He stands and turns and then rudely grabs a serving bowl of food from an adjoining table that's sitting in front of Hoss. He serves himself without comment or apology. Then he continues, "The high rigger will be setting the head and the back spar trees and the guy lines. It might take just short a week to put in the line and start trading logs. But damn it, I'm finding that time wasted getting firewood's the issue. It burns better than 2 cords a day." Grotto said, "You better figure 3 now. With a further distance you'll be skidding. You'll need the steam. And you damn sure better be skidding by a week's end." Frank shakes his head side to side and says, "I'm not bitching, but I figure that cutting firewood for the kitchens, cutting firewood for the bunkhouses, building chutes, plus 2 or 3 cords a day cut for the steam donkey, we use more wood here than we get down river to sell." Grotto responds dismissively. He says, "Cut it. Use it if you can, or get it to hell all the way. When we first laid eyes on Davies Creek, a raindrop couldn't hit the ground, the trees were that thick. And after we skinned it, there wasn't enough left standing even to make a shadow. We laid it all down. Frank nods in assent. He says, we're still working the same way. There's not much left standing back a mile or so from the creeks, except saplings. But you're paying me for what I get to the pond, not the firebox. Grotto says, we're making money now, but it could be getting tight with the dams on Hobo and Duplex and Homestead and every other little piss stream. The Marble's getting more logs than it can handle. And one dam doesn't make the flow, so we build another. It takes manpower, a lot of cost, but you can't splash logs without water. Frank snickers. Rutledge is finding that out with his new flume down Bustle. He needs water, but can't find enough up there to fill the feed pond, except every couple of days. Grotto responded, the early Swiss loggers left some of those stumps back there 10 feet high in order to cut above the swell. They acted like fish hooks when Rutledge tried skidding around them. So he needs that flume all right. He needs flume jockeys to keep them logs moving when they get water. Frank says, he was using Dagos for that until the Wallabies ran them all out and convinced the rest of the damn woodchucks not to work that cheap. Them Wallabies got to be hemmed in. They're getting to be a big problem. Frank continues, the fact is, I'm working mighty hard to get rid of one of them right now. I think he's a recruiter. Grotto says, Herrick ain't anxious to stir anybody up. At least not until he gets them logs downriver. So you're on your own. I don't want to know anything more about it. Frank says, don't worry. We're clean. I've been talking to some vigilantes about 'em. They'll handle it. Then dropping the subject, Frank continues. With the donkey down, I'm letting this crew, Hoss, Jake, and a couple others, head into town. I don't want them sitting on their asses. That'll save us a coin or two. Grotto said, you make sure you get back online with no excuses. If you don't need 'em, then let 'em go. Just remember that we're facing the possibility of the Wallabies shutting down the woods. Well, Frank said, Dave Dollar's camp are reporting more agitation than others, and that's getting close. Before they target us, we need to clamp down on them harder. And he hits his fist into the other one, crying, we got to weed the Wallabies out when we spot 'em. Grotto pinches his lips and shakes his head side to side, then speaks. The last thing we need is a strike. The ponds and the banks are full. We got to keep the logs moving. Understand? Looking at Frank, he says, I want to check your scaling numbers anyway. Finish up supper and join me in the office. He rises, but then he sits right back down and asks Frank. He says, I hired one of Buell's packers out of Micah. They left owning that Truman barn in St. Mary's money. You got someone down there that could handle it, that's going down there? Maybe that fellow Hoss, maybe? Frank says, no, I suspect that Hoss is a damn wobbly. He's the one I've been talking about. I damn sure don't trust him. Thelma had been standing nearby picking up tin plates and clearing the tables, and she chimes into the conversation in an offhanded way. She says, send it on down with the packer. He's picking up supplies for the cookhouse. Frank said, isn't he just going to Herrick Siding to pick up from the train? Thelma said, no, not this time. Sourdough's sending him on down to the siding with his pack, which he'll leave there with his partner. And Frank said, well, why is he doing that? Thelma said, well, he's taking the Milwaukee's Columbian into St. Mary's to meet the Georgie Oaks and pick up our new dishes. Replace these damn tin plates and cups. I don't want that new stuff broken up by that drunken bunch at the Red Collar dock. The pack will bring it on up from the siding up to the camp. Grotto agreed, and he said, that'll work. Then he gruffly commands, take care of that, Frank. Grotto exits. Frank stops at Hoss's, Jake's, and Nick's table and curtly says, if you're still wanting to go into town, stop by the shack for your pay. Then sneeringly, oh yeah, I'm sending that squawk kid along. He's needing boots. He's got enough on the books to buy a new pair. We'll be using them limbing and swamping, maybe branding logs if he doesn't pan out with the filer. And smiling broadly, Frank exits the cookhouse. Jake hits his fist on the table and angrily curses. He says, "Damn it, Hoss, why's that jailbird coming with us?" Hoss, also speaking a bit angrily but low, he says, "Frank damn sure didn't give us a choice, now did he? But jailbird ain't fair, Jake. He was sent away 'cause his uncle said that he stole his horse. Now the kid says he took it 'cause his uncle was beating and mistreating it when he'd get drunk, and I believe the kid." And shaking his head, he says, "It ain't going to slow us to have him tag along. It won't hurt you to lay off him." Jake, now speaking bitterly, says, "Frank shouldn't have done it. Hell, I could get on a fast horse and ride all day and not meet a bigger prick than him. He didn't have to send that kid with us." Nick was sitting nearby, and he says, directing the question to Hoss, "Why do they call him Squawk? I thought his name was Leroy or something. When he first came up, I thought they called him something else." Hoss said, "Well, you know, the first day he showed up, he came in with a brand new set of corks. He bought 'em from some cheating outfit in Spokane." Nick said that was his first mistake. He should have waited and got 'em from White's in St. Mary's. Hoss said, "You know, the kid didn't know nothing about boots, but they told him he needed corks, so he bought a pair. He complained to Jake that they were too tight. Now, Jake didn't like that kid from the first, so he told him to get some dry beans from sourdough and stuff 'em into the boots real tight, fill 'em with water, put 'em outside overnight, and said it would just stretch 'em out real fine for him." Nick said, "Oh, God." Hoss replied, "Yep, they froze up that night, and they were stuffed real tight. Ripped the tops right off the soles. Kid started squawking. Now he didn't have no boots at all. Jake made so much fun of him for complaining about doing what he told him to do anyway. He finally told the kid to quit squawking, and by that time, Jake had pretty well pinned that name on him anyway." Nick shakes his head. "You know, Jake can be mean at times. It's going to bite his ass one of these days, 'cause you know, what goes around comes around." Hoss, looking concerned. "Jake's been on him hard since that kid got here. I gave him an old pair of my corks. Now, he seems to want to get along, but there are just lots of real hard cases to get along with up here." And Hoss directs the next comment towards Jake, who'd been sitting at a short distance away. He says, "Jake's the hardest." Now Squawk gets up from the table slowly and hesitantly heads over toward the now sitting newcomer. The hesitation allows Nick and Hoss's conversation to be completed. Nick says, "You know, hard case is right. Now look." Nick points in the direction of the newcomer. "Now Jake told Squawk that that slight fellow there is really that movie producer, Nell Shipman, that's making that Idaho logging movie that we was told about, that's going on up at Priest River. That he was trying to blend in here with us. He wants to film some here to just kind of fill in that show." Hoss said, "What? Hell, Nell Shipman's a woman. I saw her in the Ideal Theater in St. Mary's at that movie called God's Country and the Woman. Now she was a woman, and that damn sure isn't her sitting there." Nick said, "Hell no, that's not her. But Jake told him that, whatever she is, she makes movies about loggers. Told him they have a train car at Herrick siding with the movie crew. He told Squawk that they're looking to hire a bunch of regular folks to fill up in that movie." Hoss said, "Man, that kid can be gullible at times. And Jake can't rest unless he's messing with him. But that sure ain't a girl. He came up last night, slept in the hay and bushes down by the Packers' corral. He ain't a she, and he ain't a movie producer." Now Squawk has now walked over to where the newcomer sits, He looks over at Jake. Jake motions with his hand and silently encourages him to go ahead, Vance, go ahead, do it, do it, do it. The squawk leans over the newcomer to speak to him. I've been told you're that movie producer that's making that logging movie. He steps back quickly as he realizes that the reactions from the newcomer weren't as expected. This newcomer is named Ship. A slight fellow, no beard, wearing a cap. Ship jumps up and roughly challenges Squawk. What the hell's the matter with you? Are you nuts? I ain't no damn producer. Now leave me alone. What kind of camp is this? Movie producer? He asks no one in particular, shakes his head, then sits back down and turns away from Squawk. The Squawk was embarrassed, and realizing that Jake had him again, he blurts out, Oh man, crap. He retreats back to where Jake is. Jake slaps his leg and laughs uproariously. He yells over to the newcomer, He's not the brightest star in the sky. Then the Squawk, he says, Kid, don't believe everything you hear. And like I told you before, rabbit droppings look just like raisins, so don't eat up everything you see. Act 2. Stage right of the scene, our narrator reappears. He's spotlighted. He's sitting on the bench on the boardwalk. With him are Hoss, Nick, and Jake. Now they are in the shadows of the light. The light's on the narrator and not aware. They're not aware of the narrator. The iconic view of storefronts and saloons, the wharf, the hotel, and the restaurants are in the view. Far end, a faint sign reads, Red Collar Line, can also be seen. Narrator speaks. Blowing into town for a holiday for most loggers. Usually started with a stop at P.B. White's boot shop, pick up new corks, and pay for last year's and order next year's pair. Now that was the first stop, while they all still had their roll, because they knew that whiskey and girls and gambling would be working to get it all from them. Then shortly they'd all be off to some local watering hole. Log Cabin Saloon was a favorite, as was the White Pine Saloon, and the Olympia, the Wharf Cafe, and C&M Cafe on 10th. Harry Glidden's pool hall, adjoining the Mountain View Hotel, drew a fair number of them. Harry always had cards and gambling, and Maud ran the Annex Hotel upstairs where she kept her girls. The St. Mary's has always been two-faced about drinking. The uptown folks hemmed in the taverns to just a couple blocks by city ordinance. Now the downtown and waterfront folks were a thirstier bunch, least out in the open. They all liked to drink no matter. Now, alcohol always found its way around in one form or t'other, regardless of time or place. You know, even after Prohibition was enacted in 1919, the alcohol flowed freely, with a few fair to middling local moonshiners taking their turn supplying the town. Even Alcorn, the local pharmacist, he got into the act by selling a potent tonic remedy that was as mean as whiskey. Now, he first made it for sale to the Indians. They weren't allowed to purchase alcohol otherwise. But soon, many of the locals were developing that same sicknesses that required that same tonic. You know, the Red Collar Line and the White Star Navigation Company, now they provided scenic steamship trips daily from Coeur d'Alene to St. Mary's. Some of them even go so far as St. Joe City and Farrell. Now, these travelers came from far places to see that shadowy St. Joe. These trips were even advertised in New York City. New York City! They had real fancy meals were served on them boats. They had high-stake card games that were enjoyed by many of them visiting wealthy swells. The regular folk from Spokane and Coeur d'Alene, they'd eat fried chicken from picnic baskets brought from home. The kids would frolic and run on the deck, enjoying the freedom, while the parents enjoyed the beautiful scenery. Usually 500, maybe 800 people would be on them steamers, all with one goal, and that was to have a good time on the boat and in St. Mary's, too. Them steamship captains, they did their part in entertaining the visitors by racing those monsters side by side, coming up that narrow St. Joe, whistles a tooting, water a splashing out, all at great risk to the passengers. They were definitely more than ready for a shot of whiskey when they hit that boardwalk in St. Mary's. Whiskey that was often laced with red pepper and Copenhagen. That was especially at the Log Cabin Saloon. Now, I said that right. Red pepper and Copenhagen. There was fine food was served at McCarter's ruffled and decked out St. Mary's Hotel. Was located on the boardwalk. It had a dining hall that easily seated 60 folks at a time. The pool halls, there's card rooms, movie theater. Now, see, they had baseball games. They even had concerts performed by the city band down at the park. Caswell's shooting gallery even had an oyster bar on Main Street. Now, these were just some of the diversions provided for the visitors. At Curtain Rise, backside of the stage on the right, the lights now are on Hoss, Nick, and Jake, who are seated on a wooden bench on the boardwalk in St. Mary's. The Squawk is approaching them. He's walking down the boardwalk. Hoss speaks. "Well, kid, did you get those clocks from White's?" Squawk answers, "Yep, he had a pair my size that a logger didn't pick up. He needed to replace a stud plate on it, so he called by telephone to Spokane. They're sending it up by that new overnight steamer from Coeur d'Alene. It'll be here in the morning." Nick said, "Overnight? By steamer? Man, that's faster than the Milwaukee could do it." Hoss says, "Enough chatter. Let's not stand out here where there ain't no booze. I'm getting dry. Let's head on down to Log Cabin Saloon." Nick, Jake, and Squawk nod assent. Steamboat whistles heard in the distance. They walk a few steps, then pause as Slade addresses them. He's standing on the wharf looking downriver. Slade says he has a bandage wrapped around his head and his eye patch is covering one eye. "It's the Georgie Oaks. She'll be docking here." Steam whistle sounds again, this time closer. "The moneyed folks most likely will stop in the hotel diner first to eat." He points in a general direction to St. Mary's Hotel. "It's high-toned. McCarter says no loggers allowed in his place except those dressed up and cleaned up. No corks allowed." Hoss is irritated at Slade's interruption of their progress, and he states, "We ain't going there. Come on. Let's get to that saloon before the crowd gets there." The four continues. As Slade, uninvited, he drops in behind them. Scene change. Acting area of the stage shows a bar, saloon scene typical of logging days. There's a mustached bartender in a bowler hat and ruffled sleeves. Tables are set about with benches or chairs. The four enter and approach the bar. They order, and the bartender hands a bottle and glasses to Hoss, Jake, Nick, and Squawk. Now Slade, he grabs a dirty glass from an adjoining table, and he sits down with them. Nick says, as the sounds of steam whistles continue on in an irritating fashion through the open door, Nick just shakes his head in irritation. "No wonder tall why the local folks are complaining about all that tooting from them steamers. Sounds like a damn calliope that sprung a leak." And still wearing his seaman's cap, he settles down at the table, takes a deep drink, finishes it off in one swallow, Slade grabs the bottle and pours Nick another drink, and then he pours one for himself. The others look at him in surprise, each probably figuring that the other one knew him. But Nick, ignoring him, he now directs a comment toward Squawk. He says, "So you come here with a little history, do you?" Squawk says, "Yeah, I was sent away after my dad died, and I got into trouble over my uncle's horse." Nick, asking slightly curtly, says, "Where's your mother? Where's your family?" Squawk twists his mouth and says, "There's no family but Ma. I think that she's with my uncle in Twin Falls. That's Dad's brother. I haven't seen her since I was sent to St. Anthony's. I've been alone since then. I'm thinking that they wanted me gone anyway." Nick says, some places, the churches ran the detention schools. Boarding schools, they're called. Was St. Anthony's like a boarding school? Squawk fumbles with his glass, showing some effects of the drink already. He shakes his head, yes. I guess at times it was. They worked us in the potato fields and paid us just enough to buy our clothes and pay for our food. Now, Mom had worked me as a farmhand for our neighbors, and she took all my pay, so my life didn't change that much, but it was okay. Now, Jake says accusingly, "So now you're saying it was good down there? It was okay? Make up your mind, boy. A couple of years earlier, and you'd have been hung for horse stealing anyway." Squawk defensively replies, "I didn't steal the horses. I didn't steal the horse. I'd keep it until my uncle sobered up, and then I'd give it back. He knew that, but he told the sheriff that I stole it." Then Jake says, other than your hard luck story about the potato fields, you must have had a pretty good time down there. You're schooling all day and a little work in the fields now and then, having somebody else take care of you." Then sarcastically he says, "You'd make a good wobbly. You better sign them up, hoss." Nick ignores Jake's interruption, and he continues, "Well, how'd it all end?" Squawk says, "Well, the newspapers wrote a story about how we were being treated, about being leather-strapped, as often as not for stealing food from the fields because we was hungry. We were also strapped for fighting. They liked us to fight each other. They called us gladiators. Said it made us easier to handle." Jake says, "It sounds like you've been practicing this story. Have you, boy?" Squawk replied, No, it's the truth. The governor came from Boise, investigated those running the place, then he jailed a bunch of them. And after the trials were over, I aged out, and my time was up. So I was told to go, and I was scared to stay around anyways." Jake said, "They jailed the jailers, and they let the little horse thief go. Well, how'd you end up here?" Squawk said, "Well, they gave me a few dollars, and I left. I read about all the work up north, so I got to Spokane. I bought a work slip from the job broker and a set of course with the money I had left, and I came here." The four now settled down at the table, and drinks flow. Hoss watered down Squawks each time. He spots a sign that advertises fresh, raw oysters. Hoss signals to order some. The bucket is brought over, and they start, and he invites everybody and says, "Eat up, boys." Nick asks, he says, "You better be sure those squirts are fresh. We're 300 miles from the ocean." Hoss says, "They're fresh all right. Milwaukee brings them in fresh packed in ice and salted barrels. They know that a logging camp like St. Mary's has got enough cash floating around to make it profitable. Hell, there's even an oyster bar down on Main Street." Jake, now feeling and showing the effects of the alcohol consumed, he addresses Squawk. "You think you're man enough to gobble down some of these oysters? Well, I'm going to give you a couple of drinks, punk. Only this time I won't let Hoss water 'em down. I'll get those drinks down you, and then you'll be ready for 'em." Hoss interjects. He says, "Is that your way of being civil to Squawk? Now back off. He's done just about to his limit anyway." Jake ignores the caution. He continues, "I'm going to show him something. Now grab an oyster, shuck it open with a knife like this," he demonstrates. "Hold it level. Now spill out the water, pour in a little whiskey, and swallow it down." Squawk, with his guard down and showing the effects of the alcohol by his awkwardness and speech, he says, I'm not sure I want any of those." Jake points to the plate of oysters and says, "You grab one now. Come here." And he attempts to force an oyster on Squawk. Hoss interjects, addressing Jake forcibly. "Good God, Jake, you're drunker than the kid. He doesn't want it. Leave him alone." Jake acknowledges Hoss by nodding, but then he continues on to address Squawk. Ladies ain't allowed in this here saloon. In fact, his ain't allowed in any saloon. But I just saw one sneaking in here. She's sitting right over there." He points to a target at a distant table, a person wearing a large stocking cap that covers all his hair. Jake hands Squawk a few coins. He says, "Go over there and accidentally drop these coins in her lap. Make it look like you just dropped them." Now Squawk rolls them coins about in his hand. He nearly dropped them, showing the effects of the alcohol. Says, "That don't make sense. Why would I want to drop them on his lap?" Jake says, "'Cause I'm trying to teach you something, dickhead. It ain't a he, it's a she. It's plain as day. That's a woman dressed like a man. I spotted it as soon as she came in. The only way women can get a drink is to sneak in or go around back and see if somebody will bring them one." Hoss says, "Jake, you pulled that same he ain't what he's supposed to be back at camp. You're just trying to make a fool out of the boy again. That guy'd jump up and make mincemeat out of him." Jake says, "Now, no, listen to me now. It's a woman. As soon as you drop these coins, she'll spread her knees apart, as if she had a dress on. It's instinct, He spreads his knees apart to illustrate. "Now, a man would knock his knees together, 'cause that's how we make a lap. It's all instinct. You don't even think about it." He slams his knees together hard a couple of times to demonstrate the point. And it's also, he says, it might be the only time you'll ever get a lady to spread her legs for you anyway. Hoss turns to Squawk and says, "Put the coins in your pocket. Don't listen to that damn drunken fool." The Hoss is interrupted by a shout from the bartender. The bartender had spotted Slade sitting there, all bandaged up, at Hoss's table. He says, "What the hell happened to you, Slade? Where you been? You were sure drunk when you left here last night." Slade answered, "I got cold while I was drifting on down to Olympia for another drink, and I decided to pop in and use this old outhouse. Then I must have passed out." Bartender said, "I hope that wasn't Mrs. Haggerty's outhouse. She's been complaining to the city about the loggers using it all hours of the day and night." Slade says, "It might have been her. Early morning, this huge battle-axe lady opens up the door holding a lantern. She's screaming like a banshee, and she's pounding and poking on me like a damn woodpecker with a damn umbrella. I nearly lost an eye." Bartender laughing. He pours and hands a drink to Slade. He says, "Maybe you were lucky that you didn't jump up so quick that your jollywhacker got hung up. You might have lost more yourself than an eye. You got two eyes, but you only got one jollywhacker." Onlookers, they all laugh and snort. As the laughing subsides, Hoss hands Squawk a few bills. He said, "Take these bills and run on down to the O'Gara Sisters Cafe. Now that's where we had breakfast. And get some hooch for tomorrow. Now, if they're out, just run over to that druggist on First Street and buy some of that squaw tonic that he sells to the Indians. The squawk nods and rises eagerly and exits. Slade says, you know, Maud's over at Annex above Glidden. Now, that above Glidden place, that's a good place to get a morning drink if you need one, if the boy doesn't find any. She doesn't sell any bottles, though, but she'll sure give you a drink. Or Nellie. Nellie will, too. She keeps the bottle tied to that piling outside her door. It's good and cold. No questions asked. Well, we might meander down there tonight, but I like to have my own bottle. But I'll probably see Nell tonight. The bartender shakes out a newspaper. He loudly clears his throat, draws attention to himself again. He reads aloud. Nearby patrons, including Hoss's group, they listen. The bartender says, well, well, the coroner's jury ain't too worried about how old Joy Montroy died. He's shot twice with Colt 32-30. They said that maybe somebody shot him, or maybe not. Maybe he shot himself, twice. Then they put the gun in a dresser drawer. He shut it up tight, that's where they found it. And then he laid down and died. And his two drunken buddies, all sharing the same bunk, didn't miss a snore. The jury said, we don't know how he died, and we don't know how it happened, and we don't really care. Jake laughing. A two-shot suicide? I'm surprised that he didn't sweep the floor and fluff the pillows on his way down. Well, I knew Joe well enough. I'm sure he had another swig before he closed his eyes. Slade says, you know, I always figured that he'd probably pass out on the railroad tracks by his cabin and get run over by a train. Now, getting shot got a little more glamour to it, so I guess you could say he died good. Traveling Skip now appears at the door, a large man about 40, 50 years old. He's wearing a bowler hat. He bellows out laughingly, can a thirsty wobbly get a drink in this damn place? The nearby patrons laugh and says, you bet, there's no vigilantes here. They go uptown, you might see a one or two. Hoss signals for Skip to come to his table. Jake, Nick, and Slade are also seated there. Come on over, sit down here, Skip. He directs the comment to Skip and Slade. They call him traveling because he walks 50 miles a clip without hardly pausing. Traveling Skip now is at the table, and he looks at Hoss and says, I've been looking for you. Then correcting Hoss, he says, they named me Traveling because I hit every damn campsite in Washington, Oregon, and Idaho, signing up people for IWW and negotiating with the bosses. He blows the head off of a mug of beer served him and asks Hoss, well, is Eric coming around? I heard he sent better cooks out your way and improving the cookhouse. I hope to be meeting with him soon on this trip. Hoss replies, it's going slower than we'd hoped for, but we are getting off eating from them tin plates finally. Then directing his question directly at Skip, do you know any of the boys pinned up out there at the fairgrounds? Traveling Skip shakes his head in the affirmative. Of course. I know most all of them except for a couple from Santa. Harry Glidden went out there today with one of Maud's girls. Giggles, I think it was. Took a bunch of food and tobacco for him. Threw it over the fence while Giggles sashayed about and flirted with the guards and kept him busy. Nick says, oh, lucky he didn't get shot. Then Traveling Skip said, the guards saw Giggles and started stumbling all over themselves because they were so damn horny. The local girls don't want nothing to do with them. Harry said he could have freed all them wobblies, filled their pen with chickens and cows, and the guards wouldn't even have noticed. Hoss said, I'm thinking that Giggles sashaying around would get me to forget what I was doing, too. Traveling Skip ignored the comment. He continues seriously. We're getting closer to blow up. The lumbermen are blacklisting lots of us, so be careful about your membership. You gotta watch the hiring agency's card. They change the mark if they think you're a wobbly. You show your mark to the camp boss, and your history, you're gone in a heartbeat if they see that mark. I said, in spite of all that, the camps are signed up pretty good. Travis Skip said, yeah, they are. The loggers are with us all right. And the bosses are starting to understand that I'm not up here just to sip tea with them. Now, Travis Skip stands and motions to Nick and Slade and points to the card room sign, says, come on, let's check out, draw, do a poker game, get around. I'll talk to you later up at the camp, Hoss, after I talk to Herrick. The three exit through the door marked cards. Hoss and Jake remain at the table. Hoss addresses Jake. We work all season for a poke. We blow in here for a weekend or two and spend it all. I know a fellow named Mansfield that he saved his poke and came to town and bought a house. I've been thinking about that kind of planning too. Jake says, I never wanted to settle down until now. I helped a boilermaker back in Kansas. One day I had a little trouble and I left fast, left everything. I caught a couple of freight trains and wham, I ended up here, and I like it. Hoss says, well, if it wasn't for the rails, half the loggers wouldn't be up here in Marble Creek. I saw over 100 jumpers, men, women, and kids, all riding the rails, all looking for work. Jake says, well, I'd be out there yet if I hadn't heard about the woods needing guys. I hired on first up at Big Creek, then Micah. Then I went on to Hobo, above Clarkie. I learned how to run a steam donkey. And then Herrick sent me to Marble to run one of his. Now Squawk enters the doorway frantically. He motions to Hoss to come to the door. And speaking in a low manner, he says, I had the whiskey, but a couple of guys grabbed it from me and punched me around a little. I was afraid they were going to throw me into the river. Hoss said, well, where are they? Squawk said, they went down that pier down by O'Gara's. Hoss rises rapidly and moves to the door, but then turns to Jake and says, you coming along? I might could use you. Squawk says fearfully, interrupting Hoss's and Jake's conversation, Hoss, they knew that I worked with you up to Marble, 'cause they said so. They knew. They even called me Squawk. Hoss, he looks at Jake. It's probably just a couple of winos. Jake says, I'm not favoring a fight. I don't need to be drawing attention from any lawmen right now. Hoss says, who is? Now, come on, damn it, Jake. Hoss and Squawk rapidly leave. Jake stays seated. And all the while during their departure, Jake emphatically shakes his head no, while silently mouthing the word no over and over again. He then sits back down as the two rapidly leave, and he disappears down the boardwalk. The scene changed. That one end of the boardwalk is deserted. Hoss and Squawk carefully enter a darkened area. Two burly, tough-looking men lurch out of the shadows, surprising them. They move towards Hoss and Squawk. One quickly pulls out a long John-type pistol and motions him closer. Squawk says, that's him. Those are the guys. As ordered, though, Hoss and Squawk step to where the men are waiting. The fellow holding the pistol holder, directs a comment to Hoss. We knew if we could get to the kid, we'd get to you. Hoss said, who told you? Frank? Frank? Was it Frank? He's about the only one that knew that kid would be with me. Pistol holder ignores Hoss's questions. Well, it seems like my partner and I ran across the information that your pockets are full, and we're both needing to fill ours. Plus, people have been noticing you're a damn wobbly, which makes you fair game in parts of St. Mary's. You need some political education. Waving the pistol at the two, he motions to his partner, who steps towards Hoss, holding a short club in his hand. He commands, get him! His partner swings the club, hitting Haas with a body blow that brings him to his knees. He again commands, "Hit him again!" Haas, struggling to rise, says, "What the hell?" He's hit again, which he deflects with his arm, but it stretches him out onto the ground. Club wielder says, "You just might end up floating in the St. Joe like one of them logs in a braille out there, butt low, with nowhere to go." Haas attempts to answer, but club wielder kicks him over and continues to talk. "Then again, I hear you got a big poke on you. Now that could work for your advantage." He roughly orders, "Hand it over." Haas, trying to recover his wit, says, "You're after my poke, or are you busting wobblies? You planning on dumping me in the river?" Club wielder responds, "Damn sure might. Yep, damn sure might. You wouldn't be the first. Every week they're fishing a logger out of the water. Maybe you'll end up just another soggy pair of corks. Yep, Hoss, it's just another soggy pair of corks." All eyes and attention is upon the club wielder and Hoss as he attempts to get onto his feet. Now Squawk jumps toward the gunman and attempts to knock the gun away. The gunman whacks him across the face. He backs away, still holding the gun on Squawk and Hoss. Gunman says, "You try that again, kid, and I'll have you laid out." The club wielder now again kicks Hoss repeatedly. Then he attempts to hit him with the club again. "Give me that poke." Now stage left. Traveling Skip and Jake suddenly appears. Then rushing down the pier towards the group, they surprise the gunman. Traveling Skip pulls out a Colt Peacemaker 45. With the gunman's attention diverted by Jake and Traveling Skip, a rival, Squawk steps forward rapidly, and this time successfully knocks the gun from the surprised gunman's hand. Now Squawk and Jake grapples with the gunman as Squawk punches him with a rapid series of well-placed punches. The fighting continues for a few minutes. Then, being bested by Jake, the club wielder takes off running up the boardwalk towards Milwaukee town as Traveling Skip fires after the fleeing man. A cry and cursing is heard. The other gunman wrestles away from Squawk. He also runs into the darkness, and Traveling Skip fires at him too. And Hoss rises to his feet with Jake and Squawk's help. Squawk says, "Holy crap, are we glad to see you guys." He reaches down and picks up the bottle of whiskey, then attempts to clean up Hoss's wounds. Jake nervously says, "Let's get the hell out of here before someone calls the law." The four start running back up the boardwalk. They all re-enter the log cabin saloon. Scene change, back to the bar scene. Breathlessly, sitting at the same table, they order and are served drinks, another bottle. Jake says, "Good God, that was close. I was shaking in my boots coming down that pier until I saw there were only two of them, and I sure felt much better when I saw Skip's Peacemaker come out." Hoss hastily wipes blood from his face. "Yeah, it was getting really serious and anxious down there. I was happy to see you two. Frank's behind this for sure. Frank had to sick them people on me." Jake, with some admiration, looks at Squawk and says, "Squawk, you sure did learn fighting at St. Anthony's. You punched the hell out of that guy." Then, looking very anxious and fidgety, he says, "But somebody sure heard those shots and called the law, and I don't need more trouble." His voice trails off. Hoss, shaking his head and dabbing at some of the bloody bruises. "Well, if trouble's named Chief Steele, then trouble just came through that door." Jake says, "Oh, Hoss, I had a little run-in Kansas," he says rapidly. "But it was big enough that I hightailed it here. The law was looking for me. Chief Steele's the last guy I want to see in case he knows about it." Hoss said, "I'd be surprised if that kind of news ever makes it to St. Mary's, whatever you did. If it did, nobody would give a damn anyways." And looking intently at Jake, he mischievously says, Well, it looks like Squawk ain't the only lawbreaker around here. Chief Steele now leans over the table, looks at the four, and says, "You boys know anything about those shots over there? Some told me they thought that you came running from there." Hoss says, "We were out heading, going over to Speedsman's, but we ran back when those shots were fired." Chief Steele said, "Well, I found a pistol on the boardwalk. I got a feeling that someone will be around to claim it." And looking at Hoss, the chief continues suspiciously, "What happened to you? You're bloodied up. You sure you weren't in on it?" Hoss said, "I slipped and I fell on the wet dock running here after we heard the shots. That shooting scared the hell out of us." Chief Steele said, "Well, I'm taking another look." Then looking directly at Hoss, he continues. He hands a small notebook and pencil to Hoss and says, "Put down the camp that you're at, in case I need to get a hold of you for questioning." And looking directly at Traveling Skip, he says, "It seems like trouble has a way of following you, Skip. You Wobblies are getting to be more than troublesome around here in St. Mary's. There's so damn many of you. You're coming out of the woodwork. It's getting hard keeping you and the vigilantes apart." And Traveling Skip answers, he says, "I don't know anything about any trouble anywhere, Chief, except I know that your vigilantes are a bunch of scabs anyways. I'm going back and finish my prayer meeting, unless you're outlawing that." He leaves the group and exits at the door marked Cards. Chief Steele ignores the comment, and looking again at Hoss, says, "You better get that head cut looked at before you bleed out." Hoss returns the book to the chief, and the chief exits. Hoss nods his head up and down approvingly and says, "Jake, I'm sure glad you had a change of mind and thought about getting Traveling Skip to come help us." Jake said, "I was trying to stay out of trouble and not have anybody even notice me. And I sure don't want to go back to Kansas in irons. But jumping freight's taught me one thing. The rail-riding Wallabies always carried iron. So I figured Traveling Skip sure enough had his, too." Hoss chuckled and says, "You done right, Jake, you done right." He quickly drowns his drink and motions to the others to drink up also. "Let's get on down to Boathouse Nellie's and cap off the night. She'll clean me up a little bit and bandage me up. And Jake, if you're not too drunk, maybe you'll find that Nellie's new fire-eating redhead Jill just might fit that high opinion you got of yourself regarding the ladies." They commence walking abreast, talking. Jake, slurring his words slightly, says, "I sure heard about her. The story is that she's not in the business just for the money, but likes all the lovin' that goes with it." Hoss says, "Well, she's been known to kick a guy out onto the dock and throw his money out after him if he didn't bring home the bacon, so to speak." Jake, with much bravado, says, "That's my kind of girl." Hoss turns to Jake and says, "In case you're wondering about me and Nellie, I knowed her when we were kids over in Moscow. Used to walk with her, holding hands. We've been real good friends through the years." They exit the saloon. Scene change. They step onto the dock that has a float house tied to it. The house has 6 doors side by side in a row, facing the deck. There are piers holding the dock and float house in place. They approach the main door. It differs from the others, being a little bit more ornate. They knock. Hoss says, "Nellie?" Boathouse Nell. Nell answers the door, looks directly at and greets Hoss by name, and in a friendly way says, "Hoss, big night in town, huh? It's been a couple of months." The 3 men enter a living room where a few girls are seated. They all watch the 3 men and wave friendly greetings. Then, noting his injuries, Nellie says, "My God, what happened to you? Now sit down over here. Let me clean you up." She sets Hoss down at the kitchen table upon a wooden chair. Next, she directs the girl to bring a basin of water and starts to clean his wounds before applying a bandage to him. At the same time, she motions for a couple of the girls to talk to Jake and Squawk. Now, Hoss complies with Nellie's commands, which were given to facilitate her nursing efforts. You know, I knew I could count on you, Nell. This is the only place I know to come when trouble like this. Sure ain't any townspeople that want to pass together a logger from the marble. Boathouse Nell answers, well, who did this to you? What does that other fellow look like? Hoss said, well, he got away, clean, I guess, although they were trying to outrun some lead that was sent their way. Either the Vigilantes or the Lumbermen's Protective Association goons were sicked on me by my working boss. They didn't like my union recruiting, so they tried to slow me down. He pauses and nods his head toward Squawk. Boathouse Nell then motions to a girl to attend Squawk. The two disappear out the front door and head on down the row of crib doors. I figure that the association and the local vigilantes are in bed together. So then Nell says, I keep 'em out of all my beds. Jake immediately spots a woman with fire red hair. He approaches her and asks, are you Jill? Jill nods, and the two go out the front door, head on down to one of the cribs. Hoss sets his bottle on the table. You've been loyal to us loggers, Nell, that's for sure. And Boathouse Nell says, she turns to Hoss, if you're wanting to sit a spell and have a drink, then wrap your fingers around that bottle and pour. Light fade. Scene ends. Scene change. Morning dawns. Jake and Squawk are on the gangplank. They're talking earnestly. Jake says, you heard the commotion? You heard everything she said? Squawk answers, I sure did. We looked out the door and saw when she threw your clothes out, and you came high-tailing right after 'em. Jake says, well, it was a misunderstanding, the kind that a fellow would just like to forget and move on from. I'd just as soon that you not mention this to anybody, especially to Frenchy Lee. Fact is, I'd just be grateful if this could just be between you and me. Squawk says, well, it was sure a funny thing to see, you stand there naked as can be and her yelling at you. She had some specific things to say. Well, Jake said, look, we patched it up. Now, I sobered up some, and she let me back in. She took me right back in there. It was really nothing tall. Squawk says, laughing, yeah, that's kind of what she said. It was nothing tall. Now, Jake, addressing Squawk in a submissive manner, says, you know I'm needing something else from you. Squawk, surprised by this friendly but earnest side and tone from Jake, he smiles and he chuckles and he says, I said I'd forget it already. Now, don't worry. I mean, I won't tell Frenchy Lee. Jake says, it's not that. I need you to go with me to Milwaukee Town, to Herrick's fancy new house. You know where it's at, I don't. And we can swing by White's and pick up your boots, and we'll just get back on the boardwalk and be there in no time. We can be back before Hoss even gets up, and I'll explain on the way. Act 3. At the curtain rise, there's a replica of a steam donkey in the background. Narrator. The genius of the Marble Creek loggers wasn't how he fell them trees, but how they moved the logs after they were on the ground. Now, they started with the easy picking. They cut them on the banks and rolled them right into the creek. And then they moved up the hillside and cut 'em, and they still had an easy skid on down. But time on, further back, they built corduroy roads and had chutes. They skidded with oxen down them chutes and down the corduroys. They replaced them with horses. They skidded with horses. They replaced them with steam donkeys. Now, the steam donkeys could yank logs out at 30 miles an hour if need be, and they did just that many times. Now, some accounts say that them donkeys weren't worth the effort or the cost. Now, others say that the millions of board feet of pine removed from marble wouldn't have been possible without them. They tamed that wild marble creek with a series of dams and splash dams, in which they controlled the speed and the depth of the creek most all the way to the St. Joe. They blasted boulders and smoothed the creek bottom. Then going one better, they were even able to utilize chutes on the small feeders like Donkey and Diviso and Eagle and Cranberry, all the side creeks. They could speed them logs down to the ponds or the creek side of the marble, where they'd be decked and wait for the splash to flood the shore and float them on down to the river. The Bustle Creek even had a small functioning flume that was 5 miles long. They used that to float the logs on down to the marble. It was a tough life. They were tough men. And they were being maimed or even killed by them dangerous conditions of logging. But a world war had started in Europe, and the Idaho legislature was getting antsy about them loggers threatening changes to what had become an economic engine for Idaho. And still the loggers, though, were getting the short end, so they kept on trying to improve their lives through the IWW. Their agitation was called trouble, so the army was called in. Sheriff Nolan jailed a bunch of them, so members of the IWW assaulted the sheriff. Then the vigilantes and the Wobblies faced off on 2nd Street there in St. Mary's. There was serious agitation in Beauville, Alder Creek, all around St. Mary's. Eventually that trouble got up to the marble. The light fades, picks up the steam donkey scene. Scene change. Lightly inclement weather, stage right, steam donkey replica. Cables snake out overhead into the woods to distant spar trees on stage left. There's a stacked pile of cordwood for boiler. Log landing with a pile of logs being stacked. There's logs askew, decked downside of the log pile. Jake, Hoss, Squawk, and Nick, in that new whistle punk Skip, they're all standing out in the drizzle, out of the drizzle rather, under the tin end of the donkey, where the winches are. There's an occasional peal of muffled thunder. It's heard. Standing on the operating platform of the steam donkey, talking to the young newcomer Skip, or Ship, the fellow that Jake had misrepresented as a movie producer. Well, Jake grasped one of the overhead lines, leaving the donkey, and it's attached to the steam whistle, and the whistle blares. Now this line's tied onto the steam whistle. It's called the tug line. It runs damn near a half mile down there to where they're choke sitting at the back spar deck. Then pointing Squawk, he'll be showing you what to do when the chokers signal you. He'll show you where to stand. He and one of the chokers down there will show you the hand signal. You got that? Ship eagerly and nervously shakes his head, showing the understanding of the directions. He says, I worked as a punk before at Dollars. And Hoss said, that makes it easier. We'll just have to teach you the code. It should be about the same as Dollars. Jake says seriously, when they want me to dump the tongs, when they want 'em lifted, you'll tug on that line. Same as when they need a tug or a slack. And you damn better not be daydreaming. It's all business, every minute. You understand? Ship says, yes. Now Jake, he throws wood into the boiler, flames spark, He says, it's steamed up finally. Now it's ready to roll. Now get. Squawk, you get back here as soon as you get him started. The choke setters will be training him too. Attention now directed towards Haas. Haas signals to Ship and Squawk to follow. They move a few paces from the donkey, slowly moving away. Haas instructs as they slowly leave the scene. Come on, I'll show you the best spot for this setup. Now keep an eye overhead all times, or a swinging tong or might wrap you silly. If you're near that back spar, a dragging log can get you in between. They slowly move away. Haas has his arm over Ship's back as he continues his instruction. Now you watch me. Arm up means tongs here. You do 1 pull. Arm up, log choke, ready. You do 2 pulls. Log is snagged. You do 3 pulls. Emergency stop, continuous pulls. 4 long, 4 short. Man's been hurt. Now them logs can be traveling damn fast once they clear. And them logs will shift on that deck all the time. People get hurt and crippled bad. Ship shakes his head in understanding. This is the same code we used at Dollars. They disappear from the scene. Attention's now back at the donkey. Nick, working as the donkey fireman, loading wood into the boiler while Jake manipulates the levers and cables. I gotta admire your turnaround, Jake. Taking Squawk onto your crew full time and teaching them how to run that donkey, that'll be the best thing that ever happened to him. That kid needs a break. Jake looks from side to side and scanned Nick's countenance to try and ascertain if he might be making fun of his quick turnaround regarding Squawk. Unsatisfied, but still cautious, he answers, well, I was wrong about him. Fact is, it kind of shamed me. He put it on the line for Haas without any hesitation, and I figured right then and there that he was an okay kid. But I had to convince that ass Frank that I wanted him to work with me, after Frank thought that I was lukewarm about the boy. But it worked out okay. Nick says he seems like he don't lack any guts. Cables moved, logs are ready for the pond, and the appearance of others as if they were being skidded. The donkeys being fed wood, flames and smoke present. A couple of tugs on the whistle line now and then indicate that work is being performed. Nick speaks again. You know, Frank and Haas are sure to hell going to cross each other. Haas is as loaded for Frank as Frank is for him. Then they were surprised by the approaching figure of Frank. He continues, speaking of Frank, my God, hell, here he is right now. Here he comes. Frank rushing up to the donkey, out of breath, in a very excitable state. He's carrying a rifle, which he waves about in a menacing manner. Jake and Nick are there addressing him. He says, there's better than 100 Wallabies down at Dollars, down at his Willamette steam donkey. They're threatening to blow it up, and I'll shoot them bastards if they show up here. He paces rapidly back and forth. In an increasingly excitable manner, he continues, there's big trouble in St. Mary's, too. Where's that goddamn hoss? Where's that goddamn hoss? I want to keep an eye on him. That damn Wallaby's been spreading that bullshit that I had him roughed up in town. Jake puts his hand on the rifle barrel, pushing it away, and says, what kind of trouble in St. Mary's? Now, calm down. What kind of trouble? Frank, with his words tumbling out rapidly, says that they got the army patrolling the streets, trying to keep the vigilantes and the Wallabies apart, and they're finally locking up more of them damn Wallabies. They're locking them up right and left. That army's patrolling the streets. I called for him to send some soldiers up here to guard the dams and the donkeys. That Herrick is on his way too. Nick snickering. He said, Herrick's coming up here? There's soldiers coming up here? Frank rapidly shakes his head in assent, and he continued, yeah. I sent a writer to Marble Creek Station, had D signal on the telegraph line that there's trouble brewing. The soldiers should be nearing by now. Herrick's coming with them. Jake says after a few minutes have passed, there's a loud, crackling explosion. And all the cabling swings. Frank, Jake, and Nick huddle down while they figure out what's happening. Then Jake starts operating various levers on the boiler. Says, "Damn it, the main line is slack." Frank, I knew it, that damn wobbly hoss has blowed something up. I knew that he was up to no good. I knew it. I knew that hoss was going to do something. Jake says after a few minutes, Skip shipped the new whistle punk, runs forward toward the steam donkey, and Jake yells at him, "What happened? What's going on?" Ship says, "I don't know. I was watching the chokers and not paying real good attention, but I saw the spark tree splintering into pieces after getting blown up and fall over. There was a hell of a crack and explosion." Jake says excitedly, "Where's Hoss? Did you see him?" Ship, shaking his head no, continues nervously, "No, but I heard a bunch of yelling from over there." Jake said, "He might be needing help. Let's go back and get him. Show me where he's at." Ship, rapidly and fearfully shaking his head no, continues, No, there might be a bunch of wobblies over there. I ain't going nowhere. I'm staying right here. I left Dollar's camp 'cause of them wobblies. I'm scared of them. I'm staying right here." Jake says, "Damn it, then I'm heading out to him." He disappears into the woods, stage left. Frank yelling after Jake as Jake leaves the scene. "Come back here, damn it! Get back here! To hell with Hoss. He's behind this mess anyway. They might be planning on taking out this donkey and the dam. Now stay here." Jake ignores Frank's order. He continues his exit. Ship, spotting an approaching soldier, says, "Hey, there's some soldiers here." The sergeant rapidly approaches Frank. "How many men do you have?" The sergeant replies, "A squad." Then they ask, "What's going on here?" Frank points to the main line. "Down this cable. They blew up our spar and rigging about a half mile out into this cable. I suspect that it was them damn wobblies that did it." And under his breath he says, "You're dead meat, Hoss." Speaking to the sergeant then, "Be careful. They're probably still there and armed. Shoot the SOBs." Sergeant stands with Frank as Frank explains the lay of the land to him. "I'll take the squad on down there and I'll flush them buggers out." Off scene, he rapidly gets his men organized and they disappear toward the spar. Scene fades out, passage of time, scene fades in. Sergeant, returning from the forward area, reports to Frank, "Yeah, it looks like your men are all right, but one, a fellow by the name of Hoss, was roughed up when a bolt of lightning split trees and one hit your pole. His hands and arms burned a little when that bolt hit the spar and the log deck, but otherwise he looks okay." Frank says, "A bolt of lightning? Are you sure? That was no damn bolt of lightning. That was dynamite, and a lot of it." Sergeant says, "No, it was lightning, all right. The squad's taking your man to the camp for medical help. Your boss, Fred Herrick, had it set up in the cookhouse. He's going to have a meeting there about all this trouble." Frank says, "It couldn't have been lightning. It could not have been lightning. It was the wobblies," his voice rising in anger. "Hoss had to be on this. He blowed himself up. That damn wobblies had something to do with this." Scene change. Cookhouse, same scene as in the earlier act. All the crew sitting at tables. Herrick's standing in an open area of the cookhouse, facing the sitting men. Frenchy in an aside to Hoss says, "Must be some real worries about us going out and shutting the woods down for Herrick himself to be showing up." Hoss, half sitting and laying on a bench set up in the cookhouse for him, amid the tables and the benches. "Having the soldiers out here with all them wobblies tying up Dollar's camp must be causing a little fear in our headquarters camp." Herrick, a clean-shaven man about 55 years old, is at the front of the group, raises his arm for attention, and says, all right, hold it down. The men growing silent, waiting for him to speak. You all know about that situation down at Dollar's Camp. Wallabies were brought in from Portland and Spokane. They tried to disable his big Willamette, but the Army got there in time and spread them out and locked a few of them up. They're still rounding up some of the troublemakers that tried splitting for the woods. Nick yells out to Herrick, they hightailed it to Clarkie. Army ain't going to catch 'em. Herrick says, well, maybe they don't want to catch 'em. They got a load of 'em already to carry back to St. Mary's, to the holding pen. The county's going broke feeding a bunch of 'em now. It's getting tired of it. But my situation is, as far as I'm concerned, if we don't move logs, we don't eat, and I'm willing to work with you guys. Jake said, with all respect, Mr. Herrick, like I told you at your house the other night, the working boss set up hoss for the vigilantes and the association goons to damn near kill 'em in St. Mary's. We ain't moving any log till you get rid of Frank. Nick, interrupting, Nick says, yes, the ponds are overflowing, the tanks are stacked with logs waiting to be splashed out. Even the river pigs are throwing in with us. You won't be no drive without 'em. Herrick nodding his head and chin, yes, he continues. I know, I've been working with the pigs too. Jake stands facing the group of loggers and yells, what about Frank? That SOB tried to get one of us killed. We don't want him around. The room erupts into yells calling for Herrick to fire Frank. Herrick says, quiet down. I know about Frank's overstepping. That's another reason why I'm up here. He'll be gone before morning. Hoss stands shakily and yells out to Herrick, getting rid of Frank's only part of the problem. You know our demands. If the other camps aren't moving logs, and we ain't moving them either. You knew that when you came up here. Herrick starts to move, then pauses and turns and retakes his position in front of the group and says, I'm running a business. Now I'll come part way. Your IWW rep and I agreed on an 8-hour day at $5 a day. Now what do you think about that? I won't give you Saturdays off, but I will pay you time and a half. The cookhouse erupts with cheers. That's what we've been waiting for. Then Herrick continues. Your man Skip got locked up with the rest of them last night in St. Mary's, so you probably haven't heard the news yet. I'm also sending up a boiler for laundry and showers, and I'm going to hire a couple bull cooks to run them. And I got some Army cot mattresses and blankets in my warehouse ready to be sent here. That's what I'll do, take it or leave it. The room again erupts into cheers of agreement and friendly catcalls. Herrick gives a friendly wave and he exits from the stage. Frenchy Lee said, good God, I can't believe what just happened. He addresses Jake. We never signed you up, but you ended up being a pretty damn good wobbly anyways, especially saving Hoss and blowing the whistle on Frank. Nick says, you know, Herrick bucking the association, that took some guts for sure, but we're getting showers and laundry. Life is good. Herrick will get blacklisted for giving in, but he's sure got some happy loggers. Jake looks down at the table and he speaks solemnly. And I'm one of 'em. If I got to die alone, I think I could do it quite nicely right here. I'll be making enough to be thinking about picking up one of them abandoned homesteads up duplex under that timber and stone homesteading deal they got out. Now Frenchy Lee addresses Jake. This mountaineer's making you giddy for sure. I'm betting that back home in Kansas, the flagpole in that courthouse was the tallest thing you ever saw. Maybe you're not taking to this mountaineer yet. You better hold off on that homesteading talk. Squawk says, and you're not about to die alone. At least not until you finish teaching me how to operate that donkey. Frenchy Lee laughs and says, You know, like I always say, the Wobblies have got a song for it. 2 nickels make a dime, 10 dimes make a dollar. Earn what you can, but try to make it better. And he pauses. And it don't get no better than this. The end.